The next speaker is from Clemson University, Stephen Kepler, AD0AE. And Mr. Kepler, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Okay, you can try sharing your screen if you can.
Okay, hopefully this works. All right. Okay, so should I just go ahead? Can you guys see this okay?
We can see you. Yep.
All right, cool. Okay, well, hi, everybody. I'm Steve Kepler. I'm an assistant professor at Clemson University. And what I'm going to talk about today is this study I did that's in collaboration with Ethan Miller, Kilowatt 8 Golf Uniform. My call is 80AE, although it's a /4 because I'm in South Carolina now. Also, I guess I have the Alaska prefix because I'm actually in Alaska right now. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But what I'm going to talk about, the purpose of this talk is to talk about a presentation or a study I've been doing, which I think is relevant to the HamSCI community, and to try to get a little bit of motivation for people to start monitoring these CODAR transmitters that are located along the coast. So, okay, so what I want to do first is I realize that there's a lot of people that, amateur radio operators tend to be, I'm one, I like amateur astronomy too. So people tend to be interested in science in general, and I am the principal investigator of the ion-neutral coupling during Active Aurora Sounding Rocket mission, which is a bit long, but the acronym is INCA, similar to the tribe in Central America. We are actually currently pretty much going to start opening up our launch window. We're hoping for some Aurora in the next couple weeks, and the goal is we're going to launch this sounding rocket and take observations during some active auroral conditions to learn more about ion neutral coupling. And people might be interested. I'm not sure if they're going to have a live stream on YouTube, but you can, if you go to the Facebook page for the Poker Flat Research Range, which is where I am right now, that you can actually, see different messages. They have the live stream of the range radio. You can text this number. Of more interest here might be that we're actually having sort of 2 launch windows, or depending on how this goes. We're having an evening window, so this is evening in Alaska time. So it's actually going to be pretty late at night on the East Coast where I'm from. But we're also going to have this dawn window. So if we don't launch between the 23rd and the 1st, we're going to go into this dawn window, and this is going to be sort of during prime time on the East Coast. This is the link to the Facebook page, and then these are kind of our windows. So if that wasn't of interest enough to you, the other thing that might be of even more interest is that we're going to actually have HAARP support on during this rocket mission. So one of the things we're going to be launching with this are some barium and strontium canisters in the E region, so at that 100 to 150 kilometer region, and then a couple more in the F region. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Paul Bernhardt, now at the University of Alaska, is going to be running HAARP and wants to do some radar backscatter off of HAARP at HF, or from HAARP off the barium at HF. So these are this is the basic information. There is going to be an email going out about this to the HamSCI listserv. We plan on distributing that. This literally just got approved in the last 15 minutes. So I wanted to just make everybody aware of this. The frequency is 6.8 megahertz. These are the window times at which this is going to be operating. Anybody in the US, Canada, Alaska, if you hear this, it would be cool I wouldn't mind knowing if you actually heard HAARP from, and especially if you heard it backscattered off of the barium. That would be very, very cool. Anyway, so that's a little bit of just stuff that's happening right now. That's why I'm in Alaska and not in South Carolina at the moment. But let me go ahead and talk now about the presentation I'd like to talk about, which is some of this work I've done with Ethan that's culminated into a paper. The bottom line I'd like to give up front and tell everybody is that the HamSCI community should seriously consider monitoring these HF transmissions. And what I'm showing here are hopefully some results that demonstrate we can actually do something useful with these CODAR transmitters scientifically. This paper gives some insight into how to analyze the data, and the analysis is actually very straightforward. in terms of like, it's not more than some trigonometry pretty much. And there's something a little bit more complicated than that, but a lot of it is just basically trigonometry. Okay, so first off, just to give a very brief introduction. So what are CODARs? And these are the Coastal Oceanographic Dynamics and Applications Radars. I think that's the right acronym. And this is a radar that typically is used to measure ocean wave currents close to the coast of the United States. Here's a beautiful picture in California. But the basic principle is that the ocean waves themselves form what's called the diffraction grating. And anytime you sort of have this structuring which occurs, whether it's with atoms in a solid or whether it's with ocean waves or other types of structuring, you can get strong backscatter return at at lambda over 2, which is half the wavelength. So the idea is that you transmit these HF waves out and you get a strong backscatter return, which is what the radars receive. And it turns out that they transmit these CODARs have transmissions or bands that are in the HF band at 4 megahertz, 14 megahertz, and then up at 25, and some up at 50 even. And the cool thing is that they're all the way along the coast. There's a set of them along the west coast of the United States and another set along the east coast of the United States and some on the Gulf Coast. There's also these radars in other parts of the world as well. They're actually pretty much a worldwide network. But from the perspective of kind of a radar processing point of view and from an ionospheric sounding point of view, this is an example of what the waveform looks like that is as a function of frequency and then time. And it's what's called a linear chirp, and what the waveform that's actually transmitted is a frequency modulated, or CW, FMCW, so frequency modulated continuous wave. So it just keeps repeating kind of this sawtooth again and again and again. And it turns out that some of you might probably know this even better than myself, but it turns out that this kind of waveform is actually very suitable for doing matched filtering, which is a type of basically a cross correlation. And from that cross correlation, we can determine the range pretty accurately. So anyways, when we do this de-chirping, and this is an example that Ethan provided, and this is the CODAR transmitters to his house when he was living in Maryland in 2016 at the 4.537 megahertz band. But after you take an example waveform and you filter and you apply it or cross correlate it with your received data, you can end up getting these relatively sharp peaks which occur. And this is a time series. So as a function of range, time, and then also intensity here. And what you get here are different propagation modes that you can observe. In this case, this down here would basically be the E region. So this is some sporadic E right here, and this is also an E region hop, fairly stable range. But you also get this F region return, for example, and there's a little bit of mode splitting you can see here occurring. And then you might get a 2F hop, which is this fainter stuff up here. And this is for the call sign of core, for the core CODAR, the duck CODAR, and the LISL CODAR. But basically, all of this can be received with a fairly simple system. And as long as you have a good clock stability and ideally some sort of timing information, it's possible to basically obtain these time series. And what fascinated me about these time series is all these little wiggles you see in here, and understanding that all this corresponds to some kind of ionospheric structuring that might be propagating through, along with monitoring of sporadic E and other interesting phenomena. So as an example, this is the setup that we have at the Clemson Atmospheric Research Lab, which we call CARL conveniently, and it corresponds to these 2 loop antennas, and these are DX Engineering. The DX Engineering loop antennas, I forget the number right now, but the low noise amplifiers are right on the bottom here. Those are those little boxes. And all this, we do 2 of these antennas. These are cross loops. So the idea is to try to get polarization information. And we run all this back to our building where it's hooked up to this EDIS N210 and our host computer over here, which conveniently has Linux on it. And so we've used the EDIS N210 because it works quite well and is fairly stable, and the GPSDO enables us to make these measurements. But I actually think you might be able to do this with RTL dongles. and in even the dongles that are at the 0.5 part per million. And if there's any people that are really interested in trying that, I would be extremely interested in knowing how well you do and what sort of results you end up getting. So again, this is the setup that we use. This is very similar to Ethan's setup that he used. He used a different front end antenna, but the backside to the EDIS and the computer were the same. Okay, so just as an example, this was a little bit of data that we actually collected at Carl, again with the same three CODAR transmitters we're monitoring. So we can see our F region trace here. Some of these features here where you're going up with respect to time are probably sunrise and sunset. You also have a very stable E region through here. You do get the F region does disappear during the day because of absorption, but the E region remains. Sometimes it disappears. And then what's down here shows an example of the polarization splitting that we get. And this is just a calculation of the Stokes parameters, and I just labeled it by O mode and X mode. So if anybody's wondering, the paper has more details about this, but green I labeled as X mode, red I labeled as O mode. This is sort of consistent with what the Digisonde people do, which is why I chose this color scheme. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the analysis. How much time do I have left? I'm not paying attention. Well, I'll just.
You have about 5 minutes left.
All right, well, I'll try to blow through the rest of this then pretty quickly. Thank you. So the basic analysis is we want to determine the virtual height. And this analysis is very similar to what was done back in the 1920s by Bright and Tuve. And so the idea is if you know the distance and you know the group delay, which is the propagation time off the ionosphere, and you pretend the ionosphere is just a sheet, and you can estimate phi, this angle, using trigonometry. And what you're interested in estimating is h, which is the virtual height. So that's your unknown parameter. And you know you're given p by de-chirping and getting that data from your RTIs, arranged time intensity diagrams, which I just showed in the previous slide. You know the distance to the CODARS because somebody's told you that. And it turns out that you can do a little bit of math and some trigonometry, and this is nothing more than the Pythagorean theorem right here. There's also this thing called the secant law, and the secant law allows us to take the observed oblique frequency and estimate the equivalent vertical frequency if we sort of know the secant of phi, where phi is defined as, going back to the previous slide, you can work this out, but phi is defined as the distance divided by the group delay time. So if the point is that you know D and you know P, you can get H. Once you know that, you know D and P, you can also get, and you know the frequency you observe, you can also get the equivalent, vertical frequency. One of the other slight innovations I did was I just propagated the uncertainty. This is standard error propagation that you do as undergraduate physics lab. But this gives you the uncertainty estimate for delta H and then also delta F of V. So we did do a time correction, and one of the innovative or somewhat innovative features was that we used the E region hop to make an absolute time delay. And this allowed us to determine the timing of the F region. So we could basically calibrate out using the E region, and we could get an absolute time delay for the F region. And so when we do this, so anyway, I'm going to show you some results. I feel like I'm running a little short on time, so I'm going to show some results and kind of wrap up quickly here. But what we did is we compared data that Ethan collected from relative to October 2020. So two different sites, similar data collection system, similar analysis. These X's here correspond to the midpoint locations. This is just shows you where these CODARs are located relative to Carl and then Ethan's house up by APL at the time. And then we compared these observations with this WP, the wall red as O mode and green as X mode. And I just want to show, if I don't show anything else, I at least want to show this example. Hopefully I'm coming in okay. But this just shows an example where the red and green in the background correspond to the Wallops Digisonde observations. And our data corresponds to, I believe it was blue, or X was the, X mode was the black curve with the air uncertainty estimates, and The blue curves correspond to the O mode. And what you can see here pretty clearly, and there's also the error bars on top of here as well. And what you can see pretty clearly is that looking at all three of these CODARs, we're actually being able to capture a lot of the variability that we see within the ionosphere using this simple analysis and the observations we've collected after we've calibrated using the E-region data. We can see that we actually capture a lot of the variability quite well, which I was actually a little surprised to see that I actually captured things so well, considering the separation of the CODAR and Digisonde. So the midpoints to these paths are separated by 350 kilometers. So I mean, you're talking the middle of sort of North Carolina relative to right along the Virginia, eastern shore of Virginia. And then this just shows more fully. I'll kind of blow through these, but this shows more full. And along with the estimated vertical frequency for the MSR data, you can see that we get actually very relative to between the Digisonde and the CODAR observations. So that's at Ethan's site. And then this was more data I collected from the Carl site. One thing we sort of note here is in general, there is a lot of variability that's happening. We can sort of start to examine some day-to-day variability, but you also see a lot of choppiness. You generally see good agreement here. And we're really good at monitoring the CODARs at night. And a lot of this is because of the D-region absorption during the day, we believe. So that's one of the primary maybe disadvantages. We can observe the nighttime well. So this is just showing the complete data set that went into the paper. And you can start to see, we can start to look at some day-to-day trends and day-to-day variability as well. So just to summarize, we find that bistatic observations of CODARs can produce virtual height observations that are consistent with Digisonde observations at similar frequencies. And this suggests that the ionosphere can be correlated on scale lengths of less than 350 kilometers. So these HF radar should be considered as a diagnostic of the bottom side ionosphere. More details about this can be found in a paper that will hopefully eventually at least go up online in a preprint form. We submitted a paper to Atmospheric Measurements Technique, and this research acknowledged that this was primarily supported by a grant from the Office of Naval Research. And Ethan was supported by various other grants previously. With that being said, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was a great talk. And let's see, we do have to move along, so we'll have to get questions later. But a couple of comments. First, this CODAR technique is just one more technique that I hope that we can eventually implement into the Personal Space Weather Station and into the Tangerine SDR. So I think the GNU chirp sounder, I think these are both really good techniques for that. And I think it's really great to see this work being done. So thank you, Steve.